Well, let's start. Thank you very much, everybody, for showing up tonight. Good evening. I'm Clara Irazabal. I'm the director of the Urban Studies and Planning program here at the School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, University of Maryland, College Park. But I'm also the JEDI officer for the school. That stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. We have a JEDI collective that put together this series of dialogues, interdisciplinary dialogues that have us talk across the disciplines that we have represented here in the school, which are architecture, planning, historic preservation, and real estate. And we have sister disciplines. Some of you bring some of that with what you do. For example, geography and others that we also want to integrate into this dialogue. And the topic for the entire series is interdisciplinary dialogue series, violence, conflict, and space, peace-building contributions from the spatial disciplines. And this is the first of 4 dialogues, 2 of which are happening this fall semester, and 2 that are planned for the spring semester. And the topic for this particular one is social polarization. Can the spatial disciplines bring us closer together? And the little description that we offered for that says that the social contract that fragilely held our society and others together worldwide, mutually interwoven in a fabric of trust, solidarity, and a sense of shared destiny, is weakening. Our societal bonds seem to be breaking apart along fractures of race, class, gender, political affiliation, religion, and other identity traits. How can, therefore, architecture, historic preservation, urban planning, real estate development, and related disciplines bring us closer together and rebuild trust, solidarity, and a sense of community and a common future? What are examples where fractured communities have been stitched together by planning, design, or preservation interventions? How can design, planning, preservationists, or developer professionals cultivate the sensitivities to facilitate these processes and contribute to rebuilding hope and community? And we couldn't come about a better group to address these questions and provide their pearls of wisdom from long careers devoted to exploring aspects of this topic than what we have here today as speaker. I also have to say that Ronit Eisenbach, that is a professor here at the school that was going to act as moderator tonight, couldn't come because of a family emergency. So she sends her regrets, and you're stuck with me as a moderator for the night. I also want to offer a preamble with regards to ground rules for respectful dialogue that we want to name every time that we meet for these dialogues, because these are very difficult issues that raise emotions. So it is important for us to try to abide by these rules. First, constructive and open-minded participation. Second, stay on topic. Third, respect everyone's voice. Fourth, maintain composure and respect. Fifth, use the chat respectfully. No hate speech or discrimination, no sharing of inappropriate content. And lastly, follow the moderator's instructions. I'm going to be presenting you the speakers in the order that we had planned for you to intervene. And the instructions that you have received is to start with a short presentation, 4 to 6 minute presentation, so that you put on the table some issues or some values, some examples, whatever you want to bring to us and to this conversation, for us to start a dialogue that I first moderate, to have you in conversation with each other and with me, and then that will open up for the public here in person and also online. So the first one is the person representing architecture. And of course, we will also want to do away with the barriers or with the silos around these disciplines. So I know Fernando does a lot more than architecture. Each of you uh, does a lot more about representing a particular field, but in general terms, speaking from an architectural perspective, Fernando Luis Lara is the first one, and he's a professor of architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, Weizmann School of Design. Professor Lara works on theorizing spaces of the Americas with an emphasis on the dissemination of design ideas beyond the traditional disciplinary boundaries. There you have it. Framed by decolonial theories, Lara has written widely about issues that pertain to the built environment in our continent. His latest book, one that I didn't know about, is called Spatial Theories for the Americas, Counterweights to 5 Centuries of Eurocentrism. I know he was ambitious, but this is beyond the top. And I'm looking forward to reading it. It's being published next month by the University of Pittsburgh Press. And Fernando tonight will talk about the fact that in the Americas, that is North, Central, and South America, we know very little of our spatial history. And this has consequences for how we address or not spatial inequalities. Fernando.
Thank you so much, Clara, for the invitation. A pleasure to be here among those amazing scholars. As Clara mentioned, I have a new book coming up. The publication date is November 19th. So I am very excited about this book. I have to agree, it is an ambitious book. But it's ambitious in the sense that I am trying to make an argument for acknowledging the deep history of our continent. I believe I spent some 20 years of my career as a Latin Americanist, and I did a great amount of work, and I still treasure my Latin American roots. The decolonial theory that Clara mentioned, for instance, it's all very much Latin America. Arturo Escobar, Walter Mignolo, Denise Ferreira da Silva, Glória Anzaldúa, Silvia Crucicanti. That's a lot of authors from Latin America. But I also learned that the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo is not really a cultural and historical boundary. It's a very provisional boundary, as are all the boundaries, all the borders. They're very provisional. And when I look at the longer history of our continent, I see so many similarities. For instance, I only have 2 more minutes. So, for instance, we had tremendous, amazing civilizations here that were in our continent for 20,000 years plus. And after 1492, our European ancestors arrived. And I say ours because I look at the majority of us here in this Zoom, and we have European ancestors. And the whole rise of modernity, that is a central tenet in the colonial theory as articulated by Aníbal Quijano in 1992, that it's not that the Americas participated in the rise of modern capitalism. There would be no modern capitalism if not for the European invasion and occupation of the Americas. And then later on, the whole continent shares the tragedy of the extermination of the original inhabitants and the tragedy of the enslavery of Africans that were forced to come here. This is deeply ingrained in our spatial history. This is deeply rooted in our spaces. But nonetheless, we know very little about it. We only tend to know the history of our spaces in the last 100 years or 200 years or whatever the time that the European settlers came. So my proposal for this group to discuss is that for us to start addressing the inequality and the differences and the polarization that we have today, we need to go back more than 5 centuries. We need to go back to the deep history of those spaces. I love asking my students. I did that at University of Texas for 14 years, and I did that this year here at Penn. I love asking my undergraduate students in the first day of class where they are from, and they are happy to tell me they are undergraduates. They just arrived on campus. They are bringing all that baggage from where they grew up. And then I give them as an assignment to write 2 pages about a person, their age and their gender, who lived exactly on their neighborhood, but 500 years ago. And their surprised faces tell everything. I mean, they have no idea. It's not that hard to find. You can Google your zip code, or if you don't live in the US and Canada, you can do 2 links on Google and 2 clicks on Google, and you find out who lived in your neighborhood 500 years ago. But that knowledge is never coming up to the surface. Uh, Other civilizations in our planet know very well who lived where they grew up 5 centuries, 10 centuries ago. In the Americas, we don't. And I think that's a problem. And I think that's one small step to overcome inequalities is to look at the deep history of our spaces, because the layers and layers and layers of struggle, inequality, expropriation, it's all there. We just need to build them up. Thank you.
You're muted, Clara.
Shaka. Okay, sorry. Excellent intervention. I will going to be investigating who lived in my neighborhood 500 years ago. First, I need to figure out which one is my neighborhood of the many places where I have lived. But in any case, I think that you're suggesting that we belong to each other not only today, but we belong to each other across time, and that should be meaningful in order to get to the root at the problems of polarization that we have today. Moving on, Dr. Mary Corbin Sees is Associate Professor Emerita in the American Studies Department and an affiliate faculty member in the Historic Preservation Program at the University of Maryland. Excuse me, this is the alarm for Fernando. She is a board member of the Lakeland Community Heritage Project and a Lakeland Digital Archive team member. And Lakeland is the historic African American community here in College Park, Maryland. What is she talking about tonight? Calling out the long-term trouble with American society and historic preservation that has undermined the social contract, white supremacy, and racial capitalism. So it's following up on the topic that Fernando introduced. How can preservation and heritage activists use their bodies and their talents to build trust, solidarity, and a sense of community in ways that embody Jedi values and practices? Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. She then suggests some values and principles that preservation activists are already forging, and ends by directing folks to a new resource, to key resources, showcasing the work of many activists. Mary, please.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here tonight. So 20 years ago, Angel David Nieves and I developed a lecture series in the Historic Preservation Program that we named The Trouble with Preservation. The 2 big troubles we identified, 3 really, elephants in the room in our society and in the field of preservation, were white supremacy, capitalism, and in particular racial capitalism, and I could also add colonialism. So historic preservation with white supremacy and racial capitalism embedded in it has done its share, along with many other disciplines, not just spatial ones, to weaken the social contract, or perhaps more accurately, to exclude many people from the contract in the first place. So it'll be a big task, but a righteous task for preservationists to confront and change those deep-seated values and practices to build the common future this dialogue series envisions. So let's stand on its head one of those questions that Clara read and that were sent to the dialogue participants. It's how can preservation make sense of problems with the social contract? And I want to substitute how have preservation and heritage students, professionals, and activists used their bodies and their talents to bring us closer together and to build, not rebuild, but I think to build trust, solidarity, and a sense of community in ways that embody Jedi values. And I'm just going to put in here that I like to say JEDIA values, adding accessibility. So here I want to paraphrase one of my favorite preservation scholar activists, Dr. Portia Moore. She is in the Museum Studies Department at the University of Florida, and she would rephrase that question, I think, to something like, what are the conditions needed for a genuine revolution in the preservation field? What can we do that's different, sounds and feels different, and actually facilitates genuine and lasting change? So some ideas and principles about how preservation activists and emerging leaders are forging new values and actions to do work that is inclusive, that's equitable, and I would say even in some cases loving. So first principle, center the field on the people, not the buildings. Act in ways that value strategically undervalued communities and commit to fighting racism and racist consequences. And the third one, undertake or tap community archiving for social justice to inform your preservation practice. As two of the members of our Lakeland Digital Archive team, Katrina Fenlon and Courtney Thurston, have written, archive sustainability and community sustainability are inextricable. So a fourth principle is to work out an equitable way to collaborate with minoritized communities to document and preserve their heritage and their places. We don't always do this in the Academy well. Angel Nieves talks about a process that he terms co-creation and co-curation. My Lakeland Digital Archive team operates with 4 principles. The first is that the community owns their heritage and should own their heritage archive. The second is to uphold the community's decision-making in all matters of their heritage. Third, to build the community's capacity to do the work of preservation so they don't need people from the white research institution across the street. And then to honor community members' right to speak about their heritage in their own voices. So, you know, in a way, this boils down to the very often heard phrase, nothing about us without us. Make these changes happen across the cultural resource and spatial design fields because there's power in solidarity in numbers. That's a very Portia Moore concept, I should say. So if you want to go to one website that showcases a lot of the exciting changes and approaches to heritage and preservation that activists are making, I recommend Googling the International Symposium that Dr. Michelle McGowan organized in January 2021. During the pandemic, it was entitled Recentering the Margins, Justice and Equity in Historic Preservation. So recordings of every session of that conference are available. The range and depth of efforts to do preservation differently, radically, and humanely that presenters talked about in Dr. Magalong's virtual symposium, it's really path-breaking. I'm not aware of any comparable set of change-making preservation resources gathered all in one place that focuses on the heritage and geography of strategically undervalued communities. So I'm going to stop there.
Perfect. Thank you so much again. There are many things that you are offering here, but I want to highlight to start the idea of bringing our bodies into this work as well. It should be an engagement of body, mind, and spirit, and we readily forget about that very easily. And the call for love and revolution, and that the possibilities or our disciplines to get there, that we hope that we can expand all through our conversation tonight. Moving on to our third speaker, we have Dr. Patricia Wilson, Professor Emeritus at the University of Texas in Austin, graduate program in community and regional planning. She holds a PhD in planning from Cornell and a BA from Stanford. Her research has focused on development and inequality in the US and Latin America. Her most recent book, one I love, and was the main reason for this invitation to this dialogue, is The Heart of Community Engagement. It addresses the learning journeys of planners who seek to bridge social and spatial divides in the Global South. The topic that she brings today is the one for sharing key practices that she has learned from insightful and effective community-based planners and architects in the Global South, how to build trust and collective agency in fractured communities. It starts from within oneself, holding the tensions of opposites together, addressing cynicism and fear, and creating fertile spaces for engagement. Patricia, please.
Well, thank you. And I've already heard the words that make my heart sing from three of you already. And that is, you know, there's a place for love. And I could hear that in Fernando's relation with Latin America and Mary's relationship with the people she was working with. To me, what we're about is as change agents, which is very different from being an expert coming in to solve a problem for a community. It is to work with a community in their own process of change. So in Latin America, there is a phrase that people use to describe change agents that get it. And it's called mística, the ones who have the mística, the mystique. And that poem that was passed around from change agent to change agent was written in the 5th century by Lao Tzu. And here it is, it's called Go to the People. Go to the people, live with them, love them, work with them, learn from them, start from where they are, build on what they have. When the work is done, the people will say, we have done it ourselves. And to me, that encapsulates the best of what we can do in using, kind of suspending our expertise, letting go of answers, and opening up to questions, opening up to heart, to connection, and doing something that we often fail in planning school to convey to our students. If you talk to a student in the first semester of planning, they'll say, oh, well, yes, I've learned this and that. I know about this and that and what should happen. They're becoming experts. And when they go out to work, they want to use their expertise to help people solve their problems. And I'd say that the number one mindset and heart set is to let go of the idea that you are going to solve anyone's problems, and instead you are going to work with them with the intention to understand and respect and appreciate their ecosystem, their social mores, their possibilities. And at the end, when you are done, they will say, we have done it ourselves. So it's an approach to empowering, not only respecting, but empowering and letting go of solutions that we think, oh, we know what you need, so let's see how we can go get that. And instead, I'm here to support you in your efforts and learn with you from the consequences of those efforts. So it's doing with, it's learning from action. And yes, it's okay to come up with I don't want to use the term master plan, but to decide together what we're going to try. But it's not a master plan in the sense of, okay, we've done it. No, it's a learning process, learning by doing process. For us, the facilitator, outside facilitator, and for the community members. So what I do with my students is work on what I think is the key issue to being able to do that when you get to a place, to let go of the judgment. Oh, I see what's wrong here. Or to let go of, gee, I'm scared, I'm afraid to say anything. And instead, here's the number one axis, work on oneself. And that is, each night we would get together and say where it was I let go, where it was I kind of tried to impose myself instead of relating. And these debriefs are personal and open and vulnerable, make people vulnerable, and thus grows our team to trust and be able to work together. And allows us to work with the community to build their new systems together. So besides the debriefs, the very personal debriefs at the end of each day, the other is keeping a journal. And it's a journal about our own personal experience of engagement, where we begin to see, gosh, I didn't really want to do that, but I did that. And
you're right that she has gone over the limit, 6 more minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was mute.
Oh, I'm over time?
Yes, you are 6 minutes over. I mean, over 6 minutes, excuse me.
Okay. So anyway, so to conclude, they keep they develop a personal credo for practice. And examples of that are in the book. And they come up with their own mindful action rules for the participatory change agent. They have let go of their expertise as the main tool of change and opened their hearts instead.
Thank you very much. What you talk about sounds very simple, but it's enormously difficult to make, both at our personal levels, but also as facilitators in classes, in our programs. Suspending expertise, letting go of answers, trying not to solve the problems for others. It goes against the ethos of, or the tradition of planning, if you wish. It would mean that we need to accept lack of control and be okay and learn to be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. And I try to do that with our students, but I face a lot of resistance and lack of understanding. So I would like to learn more about how to do that successfully.
Yeah. Well,
But I appreciated the introduction of a word that I hadn't heard, that of heart set. So I'm gonna be using that from now on. We'll come back to this conversation, but let's move on because we have Raquel Vasquez going next. And Raquel Vasquez is founder and chief executive officer of the Empowered Block, a community-centered and equity-driven community development consultancy based in Maryland. Raquel has worked for over 15 years in the community development industry, spanning affordable housing and real estate development, urban planning, developing finance, grant making, and community engagement. She serves on local and national boards. And the topic she brings is the discussion of how real estate development organizations and lending institutions can partner to invest in communities and in the social and economic well-being of community members. Raquel.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Clara, for having me. And thank you to my esteemed fellow panelists who have made great presentations so far. So really excited for this one as well. Let me share my screen. And then, okay, so I have prepared just a couple of slides just to facilitate this conversation, and what I will be focusing on is perspectives in real estate development and how real estate developers can partner with other institutions, including lenders, and especially with architects to create spatial togetherness in communities. So real estate developers' role in general, real estate developer plays many roles and works with a lot of different partners, assembles their own unique team full of everybody on the slide right now and more. So they work with general contractors, urban planners, both in-house and externally. They work with residential landscape architects, community leaders, community planning boards, municipal agencies, and lending institutions, both public and private. And what makes the difference between a real estate developer that is interested in driving forward impact to increase just connection within the communities they create is mission-driven development. And typically we see this in nonprofit community development corporations, but there are a lot of mission-driven for-profit developers that don't just follow the bottom line, but also want to see their communities flourish. They focus on social health and environmental impacts by infusing different types of programming, different uses in the developments they build, transforming spaces that are underutilized or inaccessible, working with public partners through requests for proposals or requests for qualifications to work on municipal or federally owned or state-owned land. And they just, work towards creating programming and a development that positively impacts their residents. And I'm just going to go through some of the type of collaborations with architects and, going above and beyond just the basic municipal building codes and working with their architects on their teams to implement social design principles, universal design principles, community-centered design, making sure that there is, as the program has JEDI, just making sure that from a development standpoint and design standpoint that there are principles of justice and equality and equity and accessibility. And then with landscape architects looking at the outside of the developments, the perimeters and the exterior, looking at rooftop gardens, looking at common space that kind of bleeds into public space and making sure that communities are connected with the larger, the development. So that is another example. Making sure that communities are connected in general, spatially. Another way is through incorporating social spaces within developments. So these spaces include these kinds of elements. And I'll go through just some examples, some case studies across the country where there are really great practices of partnerships of mission-driven developers working with municipal agencies, working with fantastic architects and community activists to really transform spaces that might be underutilized or that might be inaccessible. So this example is from Chicago, Illinois. There's the Dorchester Art and Housing Collaborative. And this Theaster Gates, he created Dorchester Projects. He's an artist and urban planner based in Chicago. He worked with Brinshaw developers and architects, Landon, Bone, and Baker, and others to facilitate this space. There were underutilized buildings, and they redeveloped the building to look at this. This is an incredible transformation of the facade, the exterior of the Art Center. It's a residence for arts community professionals in the area. They have businesses in their residences, or they use, they have access as well to common space within the building to perform and to create their works. This is the interior of the Art Center. This is the apartment residences in townhouses. And then the Brownsville Heritage House, facilitated by Black Space, which is an organization that I sit on the board of. They're an urbanist collective, based in Brooklyn, New York. This is a partnership that really opened up community space that was, it was a public space, but little to few residents knew actually that it existed. So the project consisted of transforming this space into like an open access public library living room.
Raquel, you're over 6 minutes now.
Oh, okay. All right. This is the last one I'm going to touch upon. And this is just an example of just how they opened up the space to make it more accessible to residents and really promote community gatherings in the facility. So I'll stop there. And those are just some examples. Happy to share the slides afterwards. But those are some examples of how real estate developers can really through leveraging fantastic partnerships with people on their team, the architects, landscape architects, building architects, and financing partners, they can really transform community spaces for the benefit of their residents. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for bringing such a diverse and rich set of examples that show how real estate developers are contributing to bringing us closer together. And perhaps the thing that facilitates that for you and your group is the multidisciplinary that you bring to everything, multidisciplinary perspective, and also teams that you bring to everything that you do. So I hope that we all learn tonight that how important it is to have that type of multidisciplinary perspective and team integrated into our projects and processes. And last but not least, we're integrating a student representative in each of our dialogues. And tonight, this is Hannah Cameron. Hannah Cameron is a doctoral candidate in the Urban and Regional Planning and Design program at the University of Maryland, College Park. As the name suggests, this is a program that is supposedly an integration of all of the disciplines that we represent here in the school. And so she is the personification of this. Her research interest and ongoing work examine the way in which social and spatial constructs intersect with past and present commemoration and memorialization in cities of the American South. And Hannah's presentation this evening will focus on a portion of her dissertation research, which examines removal of Confederate statues on Richmond's Monument Avenue. Hannah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully this works. Okay. It's thinking. Okay. Now you've seen them all. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay? Great. Well, thank you all so much for having me. And Clara, thank you so much for inviting me to join this dialogue series. I'm currently in Richmond, so this is a really wonderful way to still feel connected to the University of Maryland and to see you all, even though it's even virtually. So in kind of reflecting on all your presentations, which are just really amazing to hear all of your work and everything that you're bringing forward to tonight's discussion. It's been really interesting to come forward and think about my dissertation and how I always have a foot in planning and also preservation. And so I think hearing a little bit about my dissertation, you'll be able to see kind of how the two intersect and also design as well. So my dissertation examines Confederate statuary removal, but also erecting of counter monuments and how this reveals shifts in meaning and process, and in particular with community engagement surrounding Richmond's cultural landscape. And tonight I'm just going to focus on a portion of this process on Monument Avenue, and in particular, the Lee Circle, which was renamed Marcus David Peters Circle during the BLM movement of 2020. So, and through that, I'm going to kind of section out my presentation into three themes. One is reevaluating, reclaiming, and then removal. And then just kind of talk through some key takeaways before I conclude. So since the late 1800s, Monument Avenue has been a symbol of power, wealth, and whiteness in Richmond. And it initially began as a suburban development. So I guess we do have a little bit of real estate in this conversation as well too, as the city of Richmond supported the new suburban development and through that building of infrastructure such as water, sewer, electricity, and with that Confederate statues. And the first being a Robert E. Lee statue in 1890 and into the early 1900s as more construction of houses on Monument Avenue also came more Confederate statues. And the last being that of Lee, which ignited the lost cause narrative in Richmond. And reevaluation of, as in many southern cities in 2015 into 2017, many cities, including Baltimore, New Orleans, and Charlottesville, began to relook at the presence of these statues in public spaces.
Hannah, you have 3 more minutes.
Thank you. And with that, Richmond formed the Monument Avenue Commission in 2017. However, when the commission's report was finalized in 2018, no immediate changes or removal came to the monuments until 2020. And so these are photos that I took during in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter movement protest in 2020, as statues were graffitied and protested with paint, as you can see here along Monument Avenue. Reclaiming, so in the US, this southern city known as the capital of Confederacy, which as many cities across the US has been what has seen segregation, and even today in its racialized landscape. But during the BLM protest, all of the Confederate statues were covered in paint with words crying out against white supremacy, anti-Black racism, and racial oppression. And during the BLM protest, another space was reclaimed in Richmond, and that was Lee Circle, which became the focal point of activism and expression. Demonstrators also renamed the circle Marcus David Peters Circle in remembrance of a young Black man who was killed by Richmond police officers in 2018. So this reclaimed space brought new meaning and identity to Richmond's Monument Avenue and became a space for gathering and healing, and also reflecting. However, lawsuits surrounding the Lee statue, which came about as the governor at the time, Governor Northam, was setting out to and eventually did remove the Lee statue, government officials sectioned off this space and so restricted access to community members to the circle. And then removal. So since, as I mentioned, since establishment in the early 1900s, there are many legal frameworks in place that complicated and entangled any changes to removal of the statues on Monument Avenue, all with the intent to protect and maintain and preserve them until July 1st, 2020. And new law came into place, which allowed cities and localities to remove or memorials which previously required approval from the Virginia General Assembly. And so at that time,
you have over 6 minutes now.
Okay, I'll wrap it up.
Wrap it up.
So at that time, coming forward since 2020, all of the Confederate statues and their pedestals on Monument Avenue have been removed, and landscaping has come into place where Marcus David Peters Circle was. And the design and the outcomes do not include spaces for community gathering, and there are no walking paths or spaces such as benches and other design interventions for community members to come into this space. So moving forward, thinking about, I'm grappling with questions as I continue my research on the influence of power and ownership and control in these contested monument spaces, how contestation reveals and what it reveals about counter-narrative production, and then what does monument removal tell us about monument making today? So thank you.
Thank you very, very much. This is very important work. We're very proud of it and look forward to reading when you have it completed. And it really gives me the opportunity to start our conversation with these 3 verbs that you're suggesting for the case of monuments in Richmond, but then using them as metaphors to apply it to the disciplines that we all represent here, and the conversation among the disciplines as well. So if you were to reevaluate, and this is a question for all of you, if you were to reevaluate, reclaim, or remove something of the way that these disciplines are understood today and the way they are enacted, the practices that they traditionally enact in the world, what would you do? how would you reevaluate, reclaim, or remove, or what would you reclaim and remove in architecture, historic preservation, real estate development, and planning for it to be the spatial disciplines that we hope for in order to bring us closer together, the title of the dialogue.
Clara, I'll speak from the perspective of architecture. I think in architecture, we have a very high degree of abstraction. And this overvaluing of abstraction removes peoples and knowledges and communities from being considered by architects in their work. So one of the things that I think we need to do, and I defend it often in my curricular conversations and program conversations, is make sure that those relational knowledges, those community-based knowledges can infiltrate the work of architects. Because if it's only based on form, it will never be considered.
Thank you. Thank you very much for offering that and for your candidness to be critical of the discipline that you represent. We all need that in order to transform them. So I hope all of the other speakers can contribute something that they will reevaluate, reclaim, or remove from the disciplines that they are representing tonight.
Well, I'll go ahead and speak about historic preservation. The preservation establishment has really focused on valuing a very small swath of sites and properties, architect design properties, properties associated with important events or important people. And these, the importance is attributed according to dominant society ideas and standards about what is important. So a stop to the devaluing of the ordinary everyday life vernacular environments that most of us are familiar with and that generate great meaning for people. I mean, that's the thing I would most like to get out of the historic preservation profession. And then following up on that, we would need to much more seriously critique, although this critique is going on currently, the standard that in order to be a designated historic site property, the property needs to maintain its original integrity. And in vernacular environments, that's something that doesn't really work. In the United States, in a commercial property, for instance, things are redesigned and, rehabbed about every 30 years, certainly in the 30 to 50-year range. So, living buildings and environments change, and integrity doesn't allow for that kind of living dynamic environment that is so rich to so many people. So that's where I'd start in preservation.
Well, I'll speak maybe illegitimately for the whole planning profession. And suggest that the definition of planning or planner needs to change radically from expert with answers to expert engagers and listeners. And it's so easy for people who are involved in public engagement to have a very fixed way of doing it and kind of hide behind the mic as they present to and ask for people's input. and to be comfortable with process, seeing planning as process, not as a product.
Yes, I am myself writing a chapter for a decolonizing planning studio pedagogy book that Bjorn Sleto and others are preparing as co-editors that speak about this matter. So I will be consulting with you, Patricia, on all that. But it is really nice that you said it's not that they need to relinquish or disavow their expertise because they are gaining some expertise as they are forming as planners, but that they need to integrate and complement that and perhaps even give priority to becoming engagers and listeners, as you're saying. So thank you very much for that.
My comment, I would like to add, so as another planner, I would love to encourage planners that are at housing finance agencies and municipal agencies to really look at zoning and the uses around prospective affordable housing and development sites in general. A lot of and I love how Mary said it, a lot of the communities that are minoritized are minoritized because they're in areas that have been zoned previously as manufacturing or right next to manufacturing areas, right next to toxic Superfund sites where refuse was disposed with no regulation. So there's a lot of undoing the harm of the environmental impacts that those policies have had on those communities. And I think looking at prospective development sites and making sure that we're not continuing the minoritization of already disenfranchised people that have already been negatively impacted by the environment, that we don't contribute to that. And that we also look at how we can open communities up and not isolate them. A lot of communities, they have a lot of barriers. There's one of somebody I used to work with said that they discovered there was a river. They didn't even know there was a river walking distance from where they grew up, but because there were so many barriers, transportation wise, also sanitation wise, it was difficult. So I would encourage planners to look into opening up and making communities more accessible, especially in new developments. And then from the real estate side, from working as a real estate and affordable housing professional, I would just encourage developers to really do mission-driven development. It might not be the first thought because it's not pushing forward the bottom line necessarily, but it does push forward the bottom line, and on top of that, you're being good partners, good stewards for the communities where you're operating in. You're building more than just buildings. You're building social fabric that will be living throughout that community. So I would encourage just looking into consultants that provide sustainability services, community engagement, like my colleague Patricia was talking about, making sure that people are not talking at community members, but talking with them and listening, and being a part of that process is the best practice for real estate developers to do. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your call for undoing the harm, which goes way beyond the principle of do not harm that we need to start with everything that we do, right? That's the minimal, but that is insufficient, totally insufficient in our days. There has been so much harm that has been done historically, as Fernando has offered in this conversation, that we need to invest explicitly and very proactively on undoing the harm. That is reparation, restoration. And then I would invoke something that the director of our real estate development, Maria de Marshall, here in the school says that is that real estate needs to have not a single bottom line, but multiple bottom lines, including those of socially driven development. And then Hannah, you were the one that suggested these words that we're working with: reevaluating, reclaiming, removing. So you'll have to tell us something too.
I would just add that in community engaged work, especially surrounding historic sites, it's not very often that there is consensus reached very easily, because meaning of sites is entangled, it's interwoven, and so when it comes to seeking community engagement in a lot of the work that I've done in the spaces I've researched, it's long and it takes time. And so some of the other words that that came forward in the description for tonight: trust, solidarity, and build the fabric, not just the landscape that you're working in, but the urban fabric and the people that are a part of that. So I also think about just the visibility and invisibility of a lot, yes, of the sites and what's there, but also in thinking about removal, at least in what I'm researching, removal of statues, and then the visibility of monuments that are being erected in other parts of the city and also in other cities today. So that's another piece as well that comes forward, is just how our different disciplines get to play a huge role in the visibility, and also invisibility and removal of a lot of key symbolism, yes, but also just in different ways. So.
Thank you so much. And I think that you are explaining with different examples and different words something that the other speakers also suggested in their own terms and in their own disciplinary context. For example, when Fernando talked about the overvaluing of abstraction and form over people, or where Mary talked about people-centered historic preservation, action, and lobbying. And Patricia also talked about working with communities, the primacy or the centering of people and community that we have to give to our work and bring in and embed into our disciplines, despite the fact that we call them spatial disciplines. But we have been perhaps too focused on space in detriment of people. So we have to rebalance that and maybe prioritize the way that we conceive of this connection between people and space. Thank you very, very much. I think that's a great start for my next question, which is allowing for you to react to anything that the other speakers have said, how they have referred to how these disciplines of architecture, historic preservation, urban planning, and real estate development have contributed or not to bringing us closer together and rebuild trust, solidarity, a sense of community, and a common future. What did you learn today from other speakers? What caught your attention and you would want to perhaps highlight from what they contributed?
Well, one thing I would highlight is one of the skills we really need as planners is the ability to do reflective listening. And I just want to compliment Clara for having done that consistently with each and every one of us, listening to understand and reflecting back. So thank you for that, Clara.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure. You're providing such pearls of wisdom that I want to collect them all.
I have a thought about just reflecting on placemaking that Hannah was speaking about in terms of, how spaces are created, um, and it would be like a symbol of either feeling welcome or not in a neighborhood, in a community, and how I felt that, and how the opposite is true as well. So like of treasured monuments and statues, and to the points that Mary mentioned of historic preservation, um, how that also can detrimentally impact a community if all of those are taken away. I served as chair of the Historic Preservation Committee in Central Harlem for about 4 years, and it was there that we had a lot of campaigns, and I felt that real estate was going and development was going so quickly that we had a whole roster of all of the buildings we wanted to preserve. We had historic districts that we proposed. We had all of the mobilization of, activists on the ground, listening sessions. We had all of that going, and like the municipal government wasn't able to keep up with all of the applications. So we would be at a loss for monuments in our community, for like historic buildings that are not being preserved. And that is another conversation that, in terms of placemaking and how we can feel accepted in our own communities, and how we feel welcome and feel a sense of belonging, and how that is stripped away when municipalities and real estate developers don't really listen to communities where they're developing, and take everything away, take their histories away, essentially. So I think as planners and people like across the board in all of our disciplines, we really need to think about honoring the people who live in a locale, and just making sure that placemaking incorporates and engages the community as much as possible.
Yes, indeed. And you're talking about placemaking and symbolism and memory and community engagement, but you're also talking about power, and how and why it is that in so many cases, as unfortunately the one that you are telling us about in Central Harlem, despite the fact that the community and the professionals did everything that they could and have available to convey the needs and the wants of the community, many of those monuments and buildings were ultimately taken away. So power is at the center of this all, and how to rescue power, grow power for the community, and how we do that in this particular system, and whether that is possible at all in this particular system.
Well, my comment follows on that a little bit. The story I was going to tell at the beginning of my talk has to do with visiting Greenbelt's Utopia Film Festival last weekend, where I heard we were there to present a short documentary on Lakeland, and a longer documentary came after us about a woman named Iona Godfrey and her son Donald. They lived in Jacksonville, Florida, and as a young mother, Mrs. Godfrey put her son in a white school. He was the first kid to integrate his elementary school classroom, and he got a lot of harassment. But a few weeks into this experience, somebody bombed their house while they were in it in the middle of the night. And luckily, they bombed the different side of the house from where everybody was sleeping, so nobody died. But Mrs. Godfrey made the comment, "This is not special. This is nothing special. There are bombings and vandalisms like this that I was aware of all over the South." And that resonated with me, because in Lakeland, Lakelanders often will say, what happened in their community when urban renewal removed 2/3 of the community, the land and the households, was not unique. And Mindy Fullilove says that, 2,500 communities were destroyed by urban renewal between, I think, 1949 and 73, roughly. So, that's a kind of, I mean, those are visceral manifestations of white supremacy and racial capitalism, and the ability to exercise that power. But what's really gotten me thinking in this session is Fernando's suggestion that we need to go back much further. So both of those things have happened in the last 50 years. And so we have this framework of, negative uses and consequences of power. What happens if we go back 500 years or, a couple of centuries? I wonder what the story would be and how the story would change how we think about where we are and where we live. That really intrigues me. I can't wait to see the book. And I think that brings quite an interesting perspective to think about. Taking a longer view and how that may change our understanding of where we are and who we are.
Yes, indeed. I wonder about that too. And I'm particularly intrigued when I exposed to land acknowledgements that have become very common. They recognize the unceded territories of indigenous communities in many cases. But then when we think about what it means to do restorative justice in particular communities today, we usually refer to up to 50 years ago and only that. But what happened with the communities that were there before, whose descendants are still among us? Don't they deserve also some sense of restorative justice that has a longer term view on history?
One of the books that touched me the most in the last 2-3 years is a book by Ariela Azulay called Potential History. And she's a historian of photography, and she works on images mostly. But she, in the book, she goes over and over on the fact that there's a lot we need to unlearn. So I think there are many concepts in our disciplines that we need to unlearn in order to move forward. My colleague at Austin that I admire so much, Jorge Canizares Esguerra, uh, has a book about categories as prison. So we are arrested, we are stuck by the categories we use. We need to unlearn a lot of what we did. I think in the design disciplines, in the spatial disciplines, my own discipline of architecture is lagging way behind. I see planning, preservation, landscape way ahead in this process of unlearning and this process of acknowledging other concepts that need to be brought to the table. It's
And you offer one of the
yeah.
concepts you hope that we unlearn, that of giving primacy to abstraction and form over people. Can you offer us one more example of the main things that you want to unlearn in architecture?
The Eurocentrism is something that we need to unlearn. I think in our disciplines, we have a consensus that we form our spaces and our spaces form us, right? This two-way relationship between us and our spaces. I think it's a basic tenet of all the built environment disciplines. But most of our concepts come from another continent, and they were developed for specific goals, for specific ideas, for specific purposes. And in the Americas, we have the real melting pot of the planet. We have people that came here from all over the planet, and US, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia are among the most diverse in terms of genetic diversity populations, and also among the most unequal. The level of inequality in the Americas is way higher than in other parts of the planet. So I think we have tremendous challenges and also tremendous opportunities here because we are very, very diverse. If we can relate that diversity to issues of the built environment, to value our vernacular, to understand our deep history, to understand that planning is a process, to empower community groups that can develop and build with their own ideas and not be so dependent on huge capitalism enterprises that their databases are dictating everything we build and not build. So yeah, so I think, I mean, in my opinion, capitalism is the elephant in the room that we need to address, and there is a lot of myth around capitalism that we need to unlearn, and the sooner the better.
Yes, indeed. Hannah, do you want to offer something to this question?
I just wrote down more questions as I'm listening. So, but I really, really liked what Fernando just added of just what do we need to unlearn? And I think, and I go back to, the three categories that I put forward in my presentation, and and also what Patricia was saying earlier about planning is process, but with the eye always to outcomes. And it's, as we grapple with the way all of our disciplines function, but also all the trouble they give us, as Mary was saying, how do we break the process while also finding moving forward somehow. And I think that's something that everyone in this field, that's why we're here, but it's also what also keeps us going, but also is really hard and really challenging. So
Thank you, indeed. And I wanted to ask you, and I still want to ask you a lot of more questions, but time flies when you're having fun. And it turns out that we have 10 more minutes, and I need to open it up to our audience to see if there are questions from them or comments.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, thank you. I had
Speak louder, please.
speak louder. Okay, thank you for the acknowledgement. So I had a question, because I think Professor Fernando asked about, but I had a question: how we can improve this love, this fraternity and community sense in our students when we talk about the architecture and the urban planning studios and classes, how we can improve this in our students. But I think the love is the question. It's the most important thing. And the love has a lot of shapes, a lot of forms. And as a professor and as an urban planner too, I think the love, the most important shape of the love when we talk about the city and the architecture is respect the story, the history from the community, to respect the people and have a good diagnosis and talk about the challenges and learn with the community before have a plan, before start to draw a beautiful city in the north shape with the theories and the practice we learn in the college. So I think the love is the question, and I think this question is already answered, but it's a feeling.
It's a comment. Let me follow up that comment. Love is the question, but also the answer. With the last question that you got in the description of this dialogue that says, how can people in these disciplines, and particularly our students, cultivate the sensitivities to facilitate these processes and contribute to rebuilding hope and communities? How do we bring this to our students? How can we facilitate their processes of formation so that they grow with these values and these intents and this sense of mission?
Well, I think one of the issues is getting students out there in the community. I think studio classes, classes that are fieldwork based, classes that really get students out interacting with people who are engaged in some kind of a project. Really getting people out there is key. And I find students very resistant to this. And
You too.
sometimes, yeah. And sometimes it takes the form of thinking the assignment's stupid, you know, too simple, or, you know, involves some kind of part of the assignment they don't like. And when I actually think there's a little bit of shyness and fear, I think Patricia mentioned fear sometimes in students. So I think it's not simple to get students out there. You really have to do some groundwork and planning. But one of the things I've found in my classes is using an initial opportunity to have a group discussion or some oral histories, because oral histories touch people in deep ways. If you're recording an oral history, or even if you're listening to an oral history from a particular community, you know, it is one of those places where love can start. You are intrigued. You begin to understand somebody's meaning system. You begin to see what their concerns are. You know, you're connecting person to person, not, as Patricia says, as expert, but, you know, really opening yourself out to listening to what somebody has to say. So I think sometimes beginning a studio process or, you know, a fieldwork project with an opportunity to have some kind of interview situation, listening situation, it can really just capture the imagination and ease the way and get students over the initial reluctance to, you know, jump in and really get involved in a fieldwork experience with people they don't know and aren't sure are going to like them, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you so much. Yes, I resonate with everything you shared. And we have 5 more minutes, so if others can intervene shortly so that we hear all voices.
Well, I'll just add two things to that. So with the students in my class who are looking at this book, there are 2 exercises that they do and develop over the semester. They create a personal credo for practice, and that allows them to give their own feedback to themselves. And the other thing they create is mindful action rules for the participatory change agent, and that helps guide them into a more fluid presence in their work.
Thank you.
I love that, creating your personal credo, and as a student, I think also talking about differences in policies and encouraging students to engage in dialogue about conflicting policies, or different urban planning policies and how they're applied, and looking for you know, their critical lens to discern whether certain policies are equitable or not, what are the ramifications of certain policies, and how can they be change agents in their fields once they graduate, to be a part of positive change, and making sure that in whatever capacity they serve, that they're able to take those learnings of, okay, I have the discernment of understanding how these type of policies will impact these type of communities, et cetera, and apply it in the real world. So I think engaging in discourse about controversial policies, applauded policies, I think is really useful for planners' critical lens.
I think we should, in every school of design, in every school of architecture, planning, landscape preservation, we should start the first assignment, the first studio with the students' own community, with their home. And they should map their community, they should draw their house, they should think about the landscape where they grew up. And that's the opposite of what we actually do. We actually tell them, for that your community, for that where you lived for 18, 22, 25 years, we're gonna teach you from scratch what is a window, what is public space, what is an important building, what is a monument. And by doing that, we completely devalue their personal experience, and we propagate this white supremacist, Eurocentric, elitist ideas about what is space. So if we could revert that and start a conversation from their communities, I think it would be a step towards de-eliticizing our disciplines.
Yes, indeed. And Hannah will have the last word.
Oh my. I'll just add to what everybody else has contributed, which are all things that I valued in every class that I took as well. As a student, I would just add journaling, making that a practice. And if it's not, a journal that a student is keeping, but making space for reflection, either as, as yourself or in small groups, just making that space for just observations you're seeing in the field, observations that you're encountering through your readings, and or reflecting in your home or where you came from, or what you're seeing through a new frame and a new lens as you become a planner, is something that planners, as we've already said, need to practice, and as they mature and they grow and gain wisdom and experience and everything. So that would be something I add.
Thank you very much. And I thank you, everybody here. It's phenomenal what you have contributed today. And this concludes our dialogue on social polarization. I invite you to come back to the second dialogue in this series that will happen on November 26th at the same time, 6:30 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's going to discuss the problem of wars and violence, and how despite all that, and so much of that we're seeing in the world today, our disciplines can contribute to physical reconstruction and to also the emotional and spiritual support of communities and the nurturing of hope in the midst of all that chaos. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Beautiful what you've organized.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
all. Thank you,
Really
Clara.
Hope to see you soon.
Good to see everyone.
enjoyed it.